Hi, my name's Kelly. I'm a CBT therapist and psychologist, and today I wanted to explain the Ehlers and Clark model or cognitive model of PTSD. So let me share with you some slides. I'm going to work through each section to give you a clear understanding of how you can use the model to inform your treatment, and also thinking about how you can use the model as a formulation for the clients that you work with. So to start off with, we have the model itself. So as I said, don't worry if it feels a little bit, there's a lot there. I'm going to break it down for you. So to start off with, we want to look in the top left-hand corner, so the prior beliefs and experiences. So this includes everything that happened to a client or a client experienced before the trauma itself. So did they think that the world was a safe place? Did they think that they were good enough? And being able to understand just if there was any vulnerability factors, were they perhaps had any other previous trauma? Were they bullied at school? Did they witness any abuse? Were they a victim of any abuse? So being aware of any sort of vulnerability factors that they may have, because this will help us to understand how they actually coped during and after the trauma. And it's likely that because of what they've been through with the trauma, that some of their positive beliefs may be shattered. So they may not think that the world is a safe place anymore. Or it may be that if they did have a thought that other people can't be trusted, that may reinforce or prove that that belief is right for them. So it's really important to unpack everything that someone has been through before. But then with that, you want to really look at the characteristics of the trauma. So with that, you want to think about, let me move that box just in case, that what happened during the trauma, how long did it go on for? Was it something that happened out of the blue? Were they able to predict it? So example, a car accident or being attacked. And how severe was it for that individual? Was it something that they thought that they could manage, or something that they kind of just really had no coping skills, didn't know what to do? And this is where we start to think about, okay, does this link to anything that they've thought before? So being able to, when we look through the model, this links to how they make sense of the trauma because of what actually happened in the trauma. So there's links throughout this model. So once you've got that, you start to look at how did the person process the trauma? So what were they thinking during the actual traumatic event? Were they being able to understand what was going on, or was it a bit confusing? Were they finding that they just couldn't cope with what was going on? Did they feel that they were just alone in that? So thinking about that when we are trying to encode the memories, or when our memories are trying to be stored in our mind, they can be influenced by the mental defeat, alienation, and also dissociation. So really dissociating from the traumatic event itself. Were they able to process the trauma through their senses, or was it they could really understand every single detail and they were able to analyze it quite clearly? Was there any sort of brain injury because or during the trauma, or even prior? Were they using substances such as drugs or alcohol? Or was there any medication that they were using and which may have impacted their memory at the time? So really being able to, so you've got what's happened to the person before, what actually happened during the trauma, and then how was their mind processing what actually happened during the trauma. And then you've got to look at the nature of the trauma memory itself. So you've got the idea within the cognitive processing that they could have dissociated. So does that mean that the actual trauma memory itself is fragmented? So it's not actually quite clear what happened for the individual. Are there blocks in the memory that they can't just, the blanks they can't really fill? So it's what happened during that time. And often with trauma memory, it's really difficult for them to integrate it with other memories. So thinking about, is this something that they can make sense of? Can they integrate it? Or is it really kind of standing out like a massive alarm bell? And then sometimes is it just the fragmented parts of the memory? So as I said, there could be blocks, it could be little bits, but thinking about the actual memory itself. And then we look into the negative appraisal of the trauma and its consequences. So within this, it's what sense does the individual make of the trauma after it has happened? So thinking about, does that change their beliefs? It has a massive impact on how they think about themselves, the world, and others. So when we're thinking of beliefs, even in the first box, you want to get their beliefs prior to the trauma about themselves, the world, and others. So thinking about the overgeneralization, as you can see here, because of what they've been through, that means that the world is a dangerous place, and that bad things that happen to me, I attract trouble. So as you can see there, it's external, so what's going on externally to them, but also internally, what has this trauma done to that individual themselves? And then the consequences. So the consequences of the trauma and the symptoms of PTSD. So thinking about because of how they react, that must mean that they're going crazy, or that they didn't actually happen even. And it's thinking about that these consequences can make a massive impact on someone's ability to be able to process the PTSD themselves. It may even include other people's reactions. Were they supported? Were they isolated? If they had any physical consequences of the trauma, or even any financial. So thinking about everything that happened to them or to their world because of the trauma. So that's what we wanted to get in this box. And then again, just kind of to add to that, thinking about obviously the PTSD symptoms, but also how they make sense of the PTSD symptoms themselves. Maybe finding it difficult if there are some physical changes for them, that it's difficult for them to be able to manage or adapt themselves. Maybe even reflecting on their own response or the behavior during the traumatic event itself. So did they feel that they didn't do enough, or that it was their fault? So again, it's the making sense part here. And then, as you can see, that all leads into the current threat. So the current threat is focused on what the individual is going through now. So you've got the prior beliefs that happened before. You've got the cognitive processing of the trauma, which was during. And then you've got the negative appraisal of the trauma and its consequences after. So if you think, you've got the pre, peri, and the post in those three boxes. So then we've got the current threat. The current threat is often misinterpreted. So this is that it makes the individual feel that any sort of triggers makes them feel that they are back in the traumatic event itself. And it can often be triggered by a variety of symptoms, which often are sensory. So it could be they may hear a sound that reminds them of the trauma. It could be that they see something, that they smell something, that they taste something that reminds them of the trauma. And then they go back to that space thinking that they're experiencing it again. So this is where the flashbacks come in. This is where kind of the hyper arousal or the hypervigilance. So what kind of threat and what is maintaining that for the individual? Is it because they're not able to distinguish between the triggers and the fact that they're safe now? So really think, what is making them feel that they are under threat, and being able to unpack this. And then the strategies intended to control the threat and or the PTSD symptoms. So what this means is that these are the things an individual may put in place that short-term reduces their distress, but long-term it maintains their symptoms. So it could be that, I'll just avoid going outside. Okay, that makes me feel less stressed, but I'm not going to have a good quality of life if I do that. And because that when people employ all these strategies, and sometimes they may be more subconscious than conscious. So these directly makes it difficult for them to actually process the trauma itself, and it makes it difficult for them to change any appraisals that they may have created because of the trauma. So these could include some cognitive strategies such as thought suppression, so trying to block out the thoughts, like, I can't think about it, but it makes them think about it more. So cognitive avoidance, so not thinking about it, trying not to think about it, which could involve the use of substances potentially. Avoidance of reminders, so trying to avoid any sort of thing that would highlight and alert that current threat. And then the behavioural strategy. So as we said, the cognitive avoidance, they could try not to think about it, but then the behavioural, they may use alcohol, medication, or drugs to be able to try and stop thinking about it. They may give up certain activities, or they may be really, really ruminating about what actually happened. So that is the model. I hope you found that helpful. I tried to make it as simple as possible, but if you do have any questions, then please jump in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And if you've got any other ideas of videos that you'd like to see, then please let me know. And as always, please check out my other videos and like it and subscribe to me as well. Thank you so much.